Welcome to today's webinar, GDPR, Increasing Brand Trust by Knowing Your Consumers' Views on Data Privacy. This webinar will last approximately 30 minutes and will be recorded for your on-demand viewing after the event is over. If you have any questions, please enter them at any time and we'll get to them after the presentation is over. There are also some related resources in the attachments and links section that you can download or view during or after the webinar. And we'll also be adding the slides to this section at the end of the presentation. I'm excited to announce today's presenter, Meredith Albertson. Meredith is Senior Director of Marketing at Tealium. She has more than 15 years of strategic marketing and partnerships experience, encompassing digital, product marketing, optimization, personalization, and special events. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's webinar. Meredith, take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm Meredith Albertson, and it is fantastic to be here today with all of you. On today's webinar, we're going to discuss a topic I am very passionate about: data privacy, transparency, and consumer views on those topics. We're going to start today with a brief overview of the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, and then dive into the consumer data and trends. We're going to discuss 7 key findings on how consumers really view data privacy. And based on what the data is telling us, we'll be looking at some of the different strategies you can start implementing in your own organization. After the webinar, we will follow up with a recording of today's presentation and some additional resources that will help equip you to better prepare for GDPR and help increase brand trust with your consumers. So quickly, before we dive into today's presentation, I did want to talk about the research and where this data came from, so you have a little bit of context. In light of the new obligations and rights around GDPR and data governance, DataIQ and Tealium undertook a twin-track research project. We wanted to examine both sides of the data value exchange between consumers and brands. The research was carried out in 2 waves, in 2016 and 2017, allowing for year-over-year comparisons. The project's main objective was to understand the consumer perspective on data collection, consent, context, and control. The legal landscape in regards to data privacy is changing rapidly. I'm sure by now most everyone has heard of the General Data Protection Regulation, better known as GDPR. To recap, GDPR is European legislation that's meant to consolidate data privacy regulations across Europe. Now, the focus of the GDPR may be European data, but it's key to understand its reach extends much further, applying to any company, including those of us in the United States, collecting, storing, processing the data of European citizens. The GDPR gives consumers the right to access, correct, delete, and transfer the data an organization like you may be holding about them. Now, the penalties for noncompliance are 20 million euro or 4% of annual revenue, whichever is greater. Some minor infractions can result in penalties of up to 10 million euro or 2% of annual revenue. Now, one aspect of this law that I feel is very important to mention, especially to the marketers in the audience today, is that of the role of the data controller and the data processor in all of this. Now, the distinction is very important when it comes to GDPR compliance. Data controllers are you, your business. Data processors are vendors, like your email or retargeting vendor. Now, generally speaking, the GDPR treats the data controller, again, this is you, as the principal party responsible for collecting consent from consumers, managing their consent revoking, and enabling their right to access. A consumer who wishes to revoke consent for the use of their data has to contact you, the data controller, to initiate that request. And that's even if their data lives on the servers belonging to that of the data processor, your MarTech vendors. Now, for some reason, if there's a problem at one of your vendors and the data gets handled improperly, it's not deleted based on the consumer's request, your company is going to be held responsible. Just to stress the importance of this, the data controller, you, will be responsible for violations, not the data processor. So we can't be thinking that we're going to go into all this able to escape a GDPR violation and those steep penalties, even if it might be our vendor's fault. You are going to be responsible. So there is another interesting facet of today's privacy landscape that's not getting as much attention as GDPR, but I think it's super interesting. Are you aware of the changing legislation that's going on in the United States? Currently in the US, there are over 21 privacy bills in 11 different states. California definitely leading the way, as it was the first state to enact a security breach notification law. State level laws and amendments are continuing to change, and it's going to have to be our responsibility to keep up to speed on all these latest developments. And if the legal landscape wasn't hairy enough, consumer opinions on data privacy are changing quickly. Their knowledge, beliefs, and preferences are constantly evolving and somewhat complex. In fact, I believe there's a definite fundamental disconnect in how consumers think about their data today. 46% of consumers feel that digital marketing does put their data at risk. However, they overwhelmingly want and expect very personalized and relevant experiences. The essence of GDPR is correct. We as digital organizations should give consumers more control about how we use their data. We need to be more transparent and open about what we're doing with that data. But I also see it as a huge opportunity, because how we approach and protect our customers' data could be seen as one of the next big competitive differentiators. So regardless of the legal ramifications, and yes, those are very, very important, it is our responsibility to recognize consumers' increasing awareness of their digital footprint and data privacy concerns. We need to respect those wishes, but use it as an opportunity to increase the trust they have with our brand in doing so. So instead of taking a data-only view of our consumers, just seeing them as data points, profiles, aggregates, members of segments, it is time for us to start looking at them as people. All right, so time to jump in. Let's take a look at what some of these key findings are. As I mentioned earlier, we did partner with Data IQ on this research project, and we really took notice of about 7 areas or trends that we felt were really interesting to explore. They include how consumers feel about GDPR, data privacy legislation, data sharing, personalization, website app tracking, how they perceive the value of good personalized experiences, those bad, creepy personalized experiences, and how they're feeling about things like preferences and choices. So the first area we're going to talk a little bit about is actually consumer awareness of the GDPR and all this data privacy legislation. So for GDPR to actually have the intended impact, consumers will need to take advantage of the rights that the regulation is actually providing them. But I think it's interesting, to dig a little bit into how much they actually understand. According to our study with Data IQ, only 10% of consumers say they are fully aware of the new law and how it's going to protect their data. 28% they're reasonably aware, they've heard about the law. 24% know that there is some new law that's coming. But the interesting thing here is the largest group, this 38%, they aren't aware of the regulation or what it's going to do at all. So what steps can we take to help increase brand trust? You will want to ensure that the MarTech tools you have within your stack are going to satisfy the data privacy concerns of the most knowledgeable consumers. In this case, it's that 10% very knowledgeable group we were talking about. Now, you can achieve this by providing key consent mechanisms on your site that will ask consumers to permit online tracking and data transmission. It is likely that this savvy group of consumers, this 10%, will reward online brands with strong loyalty as a result of being presented this choice. And in fact, we have seen almost 20% of consumers are going to actually avoid brands that are tracking them and don't offer this type of transparency. This is an indication that companies who rapidly adopt these proper GDPR strategies are going to have what we like to call a first mover's advantage. and they stand to gain a significant share of customers who will not do business with the brands that they simply don't trust. So the second section, talking a little bit more about how consumers actually feel about sharing their data. With the GDPR on the horizon, as well as all this possible new legislation in the US, the good news for businesses like you that rely on this data is that consumer attitudes towards sharing their information have become significantly more positive in the last 12 months. 42% of those we surveyed are happy to share the data if the need is explained. 21% are happy to share the data if they trust the company. So to increase that consumer trust with your brand, whether you are currently satisfying the 42% of consumers who are happy to share their data with you if you explain why, or you're benefiting from existing brand loyalty with the 21% of consumers who already trust your organization enough to share their data, it is very, very important for companies to provide traceable pathways of data usage that will result in having the consumer feel that they are a part of your business data strategy. Any solution or tool your business is employing should be able to provide consumers with a customized modal experience that includes clear descriptions of each data technology you're using. And those descriptions should be simple language, very concise, clear, that everyone can understand, not just the tech savvy. This is another indication that transparency, consent, and control will combine to make the data value exchange between your business and consumers more equal. For example, with Tealium, instead of listing a number of DSP technologies that you are working to advertise to consumers throughout a publishing network, Tealium can actually categorize all those DSP technologies into a modal and present a simple on-off choice that explains, it says something like, hey, we'd like to continue showing you the products that you're interested in the next time you hit one of our trusted publisher sites. Is that okay with you? This very clear, transparent explanation makes sense to a consumer and starts to form a connection between them and your brand. All right, so let's dive into a little bit about personalization. I know that that's a very hot topic right now and how we're using data to develop those strategies. Our survey showed that consumers notice when their devices and the services and apps that they're accessing seem to reflect that they know who they are or where they are. Now, geolocation marketing is clearly a persuasive and recognized benefit of data tracking for a brand. And as you can see from this chart, consumers are noticing. Over 64% say it is an awareness of their location, which is most evident in regards to personalization. Now, consumer convenience definitely factors into how comfortable consumers are with sharing their data and seems to suggest that the ease of use tends to override any hesitations they have towards sharing data. So when a consumer is shown content that reflects their interests, over 46% were comfortable with personalization. Personalization strategies, which reduce the effort needed by a customer to use a site, an app, a service, such as remembering payment card details or personal information like your address, those were each about 40%. So what can you do? Consumers appear to appreciate you using their data when it provides convenience and value to them. So provide those types of personalization services. Use technology that can govern the specific pieces of data your personalization tools might utilize to develop customer experiences. So an example would be, look for a data hub solution that can help you specifically govern the precise pieces of data that a personalization tool will use to increase convenience and simplify the online purchasing experience. By configuring separate audiences that map to different sharing options provided, a brand's going to be able to interact with their consumers in a way that emanates a high degree of trust and mutual respect. If you set up a preferences page on your site, you could feasibly allow a consumer to pick and choose the precise data that they would be okay with you using for digital marketing and personalization strategies. So, for example, like you could allow your consumer to tell you, I'm okay with you tracking how much I spend with your products or what products I like, but I'm simply not okay with you advertising my purchases to various news sites. This type of preferences page and the consumer selected choices would result in a consumer being left out of certain segments you use, like the display ad audience, because they just told you they weren't comfortable with that. But they did give you permission to insert them into a product personalization audience because they were comfortable with that. It's going to be extremely important to utilize technology that, again, is going to help you govern those specific pieces of your consumer's data. All right, so let's talk a little bit about consumer thoughts and opinions on site and app tracking. Tracking consumers online and via mobile apps, it's a fundamental aspect of digital marketing and the customer experience. But for consumers, that story is a little different. Almost 40% of those we surveyed said they would prefer not to be tracked online, and they actually avoid opting in. On top of this, nearly 17% say they avoid sites and apps, which they know are tracking them. While almost 33% of consumers, they say they're okay with it, but the key indicator here is that they were given a choice. A significantly higher proportion of consumers are okay with being tracked, actually also claim to be fully aware of GDPR. So based on these figures, it's clear that choice, giving your consumers choice, and providing them education are going to be the key components to overcoming the risk of consumers opting out of experiences or using ad blockers. So instead of being vague about the reason for the data collection and tracking, our recommendation for you is to expose the numerous ways in which the interactions on your digital properties will take place. Explain what the benefits are, while at the same time allowing the consumers to always have the ability to just turn it off. Merely providing the consumer with a simple link to an opt-out page, for example, with some simple copy, hey, you can always change your mind by visiting our privacy page. That will likely win hearts and minds over and over again. Instead of burying the privacy policy in the footer of the page and hiding it, help your consumers understand what you and your brand are trying to communicate to them, and letting them know that your customers, they're always in control. This openness and transparency is going to encourage repeat visits and brand loyalty. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the how consumers perceive value of good personalized experiences. So here we're going to kind of dive back into the whole location tracking thing here. Consumers, they are noticing that websites and apps are tracking them. Now, you value that for the ability to deliver a great experience to them, but them valuing that is quite another. Now, despite the convenience that location tracking services provide, like, hey, where's my nearest gas station? Where's my nearest pharmacy? And other location-based experiences, these types of services, which were most widely noticed, also scored the lowest on perceived value with just a score of 2.59 out of 5. The most highly rated for value are those personalized experiences based around consumer convenience. Things like autofill for forms, personalized offer, personalized content, interest-based content, or simply being recognized by the brand. Now, the upside of these consumer ratings is that all of them fall on the positive side of the scale, even though they involve data collection and tracking. So the majority of consumers feel positive about sharing data if it results in experiences that are tailored to them. For example, you can use a customer data platform to build customer profiles that contain information about the consumer's preferences and what types of personalization they seem to like and engage with. Having this profile will ensure that you are more likely to engage with a customer using the methods that they've indicated to you that they are comfortable with. All right, so the other side of this particular data set is how do bad personalized experiences affect consumers and their mindset? Poor customer experiences can sometimes lead consumers to believe that their data has been misused. They find it troubling, and it's likely to cause the individual to avoid that business in the future. We noticed in our survey about half of consumers adopt a rational attitude towards personalization and feel like it's okay, again, if they have a choice. However, negative feelings are expressed by a significant number of those consumers. 10% are saying personalization feels kind of crappy if it's taken too far. 15% are worried about it, but they feel like they're really unable to actually do anything. And 17% just really dislike the whole personalized experience. Now, sometimes these poor experiences result from what some in the industry like to call poor data hygiene. Data hygiene is the process to ensure the use of cleanliness, the cleanliness of your data. Now, data is considered clean if it's relatively error-free. Dirty data becomes a problem, and it's caused by a number of factors, including duplicate customer records, incomplete or outdated data, and the improper separation of fields from disparate systems across your organization. Now, data hygiene is important to pay attention to because the errors can cause consumer distress, albeit they're inadvertent. That bad experience and that distress causes significant deterioration of the trust with your brand. Also, poor data hygiene can also result in invasive or aggressive personalization tactics, which again, don't do your brand any benefit. So privacy is becoming more and more nuanced, and there's such a rise in the number of marketing technologies our businesses are using. Sometimes necessary steps like data governance are getting missed. Now, the problem is this is more likely to get worse and have an even more negative impact if the consumer is not treated in a very customer-centric manner. Technologies in the MarTech system today are able to onboard consumer data from historical databases and other companies, and then provide companies like yours with second-party data that the consumer really had no intention of sharing with you. Then a consumer gets a personalized offer from your company using that data, and they know they had no intention of sharing that information with you. This results in a prime example of what we would call creepy personalization. Now, by taking advantage of tools like a customer data platform, your company can build richer sets of first-party data by expanding the digital realm and understanding the consumer's experiences and preferences in other areas of interaction, such as in-store purchases or some of their CRM activity. Using other legitimate sources of data for profile building, it's going to lead to greater consumer satisfaction since you are always going to be able to share what data you have collected in real time. And you're not going to have to use complicated or unnecessary processes, and the consumer can instantly decide what data is off limits to you and what data is not. And this is only going to help increase the trust and future interaction with your company. All right, so an important one here in the research we saw was about preferences and choice. And I really wanted to make sure we spent a little bit more time talking about this today because it's so important. You know, again, if consumers are noticing that the sites and the apps that they use are being personalized, even if they have a sort of a positive reaction to it, do they really feel it's okay that you're using their personal data in this way? Notably, half of consumers, about 48.7%, adopt a pretty rational attitude that personalization is okay, but that is dependent that they have a choice. So it's a positive indication, but again, they're really telling us here, I'm okay with it, but I want you to give me the choice in the situation. So businesses should really, do a couple of things here. MarTech tools like a centralized data hub can further contribute to the growing momentum of trust and personalization strategies by offering companies like yourself a way to own a consistently up-to-date profile on every consumer they do business with, and ensuring that transparency measures, they're governed in a central location. Because a platform that's managing and housing your customer data, it is the first touch point for every data entry into your system. And in using this, you can offer the consumer 100% assurance that his or her data choices are going to be respected, since you can control what data will enter your systems. By putting the power of transparency into the consumer's hands, you are offering them something that is innovative and refreshing. Brands that provide this specific capability are going to be the ones that are setting the bar for the industry. Consumers are more aware than ever about how their digital activity is leveraged to obtain data and how it is used to build tailored experiences. Now, the good news is that their willingness to share data is also on the rise, with nearly 2/3 of consumers saying that they're happy to share their personal information with you. That is a significant increase since the survey results in 2016. However, this consumer sharing is dependent on a clear understanding of why you're requesting their data, the choices available to the consumer of what data they can share, and simply their trust in your brand. So for those of you today who would like to go ahead, get a jump start, understanding this legal landscape and starting to see where your organization sits, you really want to start providing consumers with more transparency around how you're using their data. We have included a checklist that you can reference. It is located in the attachments and links section in BrightTalk. You should see it there right on your page. As I mentioned earlier, we will also follow up a recording of this webinar, a copy of the full report we did with Data IQ, and some other helpful data governance and privacy materials. So it looks like we have time for a couple of questions. Let me take a look here. All right, so this is a good one. This person asked, how do I get started preparing for GDPR? I would say my recommendation here my recommendation on a first step would be to perform a due diligence and get a comprehensive understanding of where things kind of stand in your business today. And I would divide those things kind of up into doing that due diligence on the business side, but also the technology side. So on the business side, I think I'd want to identify vendors that you have in use. I'd also look to validate that vendor access, see what data that you're collecting from your customers that those vendors actually have access to, and do they need that access? And take a look at all those current contracts. See, what you signed a couple of years ago and how that's going to, affect the changing world that we live in today. On the technology side, I definitely recommend auditing all your vendor technologies, reviewing all their policies. And sometimes it's easy to forget, vendors that you may not be doing business with, that you don't have a contract with anymore. They may still be sitting on your site collecting data. I have actually seen that happen before, so definitely something to look into. And if you encounter any non-compliant vendors, remove them. If they're not going to play by the rules, you don't want to put your customers or your business at risk. All right, so we are running out of time, and it does look like we have time for one more question. And I'm sorry, guys, if you had a question and we did not get to it today, don't stress, don't worry about it. We're going to reach out to each one of you individually and make sure that all of your questions get answered. We really do appreciate you being here today and participating. Our last question is, so you referenced that CDPs can help unify customer data to drive better experiences, but what exactly is a CDP? So a CDP is a customer data platform. Basically, it's a system that centralizes your customer data from all the different types of sources that you're using. So your website, mobile devices, IoT, in-store data, call center data. It takes all that data, unifies it into a customer profile, and then makes the data available to all the systems that you're using for marketing campaigns, customer service, and any other different customer experience initiatives you have. One thing I think is important to note here as well is what a CDP is not. So there's definitely, in the MarTech space, I think some overlap of a CDP with some tools, but definitely a CDP is not a CRM system. A CDP is not a DMP. CDP is not a personalization tool. And those are some of the big areas that I sometimes think people misconstrue and overlap. But if you guys would like any more information about customer data platforms, we do have a lot of great information and resources on our website, tealium.com. So if you're interested in learning more, I would suggest you check that out. So thank you very much for your time today, guys. I really appreciate it, and I hope you learned a little something on a great and very interesting topic.